This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Twilight of the Idols by Friedrich Nietzsche. Chapter 9. Skirmishes in a War with the Age. Part 4. 42. Where faith is necessary. Nothing is more rare among moralists and saints than uprightness. Maybe they say the reverse is true. Maybe they even believe it. For when faith is more useful, more effective, more convincing than conscious hypocrisy, by instinct that hypocrisy forthwith becomes innocent. First principle towards the understanding of great saints. The same holds good of philosophers, that other order of saints. Their whole business compels them to concede only certain truths, that is to say, those by means of which their particular trade receives the public sanction, to speak cantingly the truths of practical reason. They know what they must prove. In this respect they are practical. They recognize each other by the fact that they agree upon certain truths. Thou shalt not lie, in plain English. Beware, Mr. Philosopher, of speaking the truth. 43. A quiet hint to conservatives. That which we did not know formerly, and know now, or might know if we chose, is the fact that a retrograde formation, a reversion in any sense or degree, is absolutely impossible. We physiologists, at least, are aware of this. But all priests and moralists have believed in it. They wish to drag and screw man back to a former standard of virtue. Morality has always been a Procrustean bed. Even the politicians have imitated the preachers of virtue in this matter. There are parties at the present day whose one aim and dream is to make all things adopt the crab march. But not everyone can be a crab. It cannot be helped. We must go forward, that is to say, step by step, further and further into decadence. This is my definition of modern progress. We can hinder this development, and by so doing dam up and accumulate degeneration itself and render it more convulsive, more volcanic. We cannot do more. 44. My concept of genius. Great men, like great ages, are explosive material in which a stupendous amount of power is accumulated. The first conditions of their existence are always historical and physiological. They are the outcome of the fact that for long ages energy has been collected, hoarded up, saved up, and preserved for their use, and that no explosion has taken place. When the tension in the bulk has become sufficiently excessive, the most fortuitous stimulus suffices in order to call genius, great deeds, and momentous fate into the world. What, then, is the good of all environment, historical periods, zeitgeist, and public opinion? Take the case of Napoleon. France of the Revolution, and still more of the period preceding the Revolution, would have brought forward a type which was the very reverse of Napoleon. It actually did produce such a type. And because Napoleon was something different, the heir of a stronger, more lasting, and older civilization than that which in France was being smashed to atoms, he became master there. He was the only master there. Great men are necessary. The age in which they appear is a matter of chance. The fact that they almost invariably master their age is accounted for simply by the fact that they are stronger, that they are older, and that power has been stored longer for them. The relation of a genius to his age is that which exists between strength and weakness, and between maturity and youth. The age is relatively always very much younger, thinner, less mature, less resolute, and more childish. The fact that the general opinion in France at the present day is utterly different on this very point, in Germany too, but that is of no consequence. The fact that in that country the theory of environment, a regular neuropathic notion, has become sacrosanct and almost scientific, and finds acceptance even among the physiologists, is a very bad and exceedingly depressing sign. In England, too, the same belief prevails, but nobody will be surprised at that. The Englishman knows only two ways of understanding the genius and the great man, either democratically in the style of Buckle, or religiously after the manner of Carlyle. The danger which great men and great ages represent is simply extraordinary. Every kind of exhaustion and sterility follows in their wake. The great man is an end. The great age, the Renaissance, for instance, is an end. The genius, in work and in deed, is necessarily a squanderer. The fact that he spends himself constitutes his greatness. The instinct of self-preservation is, as it were, suspended in him. The overpowering pressure of outflowing energy in him forbids any such protection and prudence. People call this self-sacrifice. They praise his heroism, his indifference to his own well-being, his utter devotion to an idea, a great cause, a fatherland. All misunderstandings. He flows out, he flows over, he consumes himself, he does not spare himself, and does all this with fateful necessity, irrevocably, involuntarily, just as a river involuntarily bursts its dams. But owing to the fact that humanity has been much indebted to such explosives, it has endowed them with many things, for instance, with a kind of higher morality. This is indeed the sort of gratitude that humanity is capable of. It misunderstands its benefactors. 45. The criminal and his like. The criminal type is the type of the strong man amid unfavorable conditions. A strong man made sick. He lacks the wild and savage state, a form of nature and existence which is freer and more dangerous, in which everything that constitutes the shield and the sword in the instinct of the strong man takes a place by right. Society puts a ban upon his virtues. The most spirited instincts inherent in him immediately become involved with the depressing passions, with suspicion, fear, and dishonor. But this is almost the recipe for physiological degeneration. When a man has to do that which he is best suited to do, which he is most fond of doing, not only clandestinely, but also with long suspense, caution, and ruse, he becomes anemic, and inasmuch as he is always having to pay for his instincts in the form of danger, persecution, and fatalities, even his feelings begin to turn against these instincts. He begins to regard them as fatal. It is society, our tame, mediocre, castrated society, in which an untutored son of nature who comes to us from his mountains or from his adventures at sea must necessarily degenerate into a criminal, or almost necessarily, for there are cases in which such a man shows himself to be stronger than society. The Corsican Napoleon is the most celebrated case of this. Concerning the problem before us, Dostoevsky's testimony is of importance. Dostoevsky, who, incidentally, was the only psychologist from whom I had anything to learn. He belongs to the happiest windfalls of my life, happier even than the discovery of Stendhal. This profound man, who was right 10 times over in esteeming the superficial Germans low, found the Siberian convicts among whom he lived for many years, those thoroughly hopeless criminals for whom no road back to society stood open, very different from what even he had expected. That is to say, carved from about the best, hardest, and most valuable material that grows on Russian soil. Let us generalize the case of the criminal. Let us imagine creatures who, for some reason or other, fail to meet with public approval, who know that they are regarded neither as beneficent nor useful. The feeling of the Chandala, who are aware that they are not looked upon as equal, but as proscribed, unworthy, polluted. The thoughts and actions of all such natures are tainted with a subterranean mouldiness. Everything in them is of a paler hue than in those on whose existence the sun shines. But almost all those creatures whom nowadays we honor and respect formerly lived in this semi-sepulchral atmosphere. The man of science, the artist, the genius, the free spirit, the actor, the businessman, and the great explorer. As long as the priest represented the highest type of man, every valuable kind of man was depreciated. The time is coming, this I guarantee, when he will pass as the lowest type, as our Chandala, as the falsest and most disreputable kind of man. I call your attention to the fact that even now, under the sway of the mildest customs and usages which have ever ruled on earth, or at least in Europe, every form of standing aside, every kind of prolonged, excessively prolonged concealment, every unaccustomed and obscure form of existence, tends to approximate to that type which the criminal exemplifies to perfection. All pioneers of the spirit have, for a while, the grey and fatalistic mark of the Chandala on their brows, not because they are regarded as Chandala, but because they themselves feel the terrible chasm which separates them from all that is traditional and honorable. Almost every genius knows the Catilinarian life as one of the stages in his development, a feeling of hate, revenge, and revolt against everything that exists, that has ceased to evolve. Catiline, the early stage of every Caesar. 46. Here the outlook is free. When a philosopher holds his tongue, it may be the sign of the loftiness of his soul. When he contradicts himself, it may be love, and the very courtesy of a knight of knowledge may force him to lie. It has been said, and not without subtlety, Il a indigné des grands cœurs de répandre le trouble qu'il ressent. But it is necessary to add that there may also be grandeur de cœur in not shrinking from the most undignified proceeding. A woman who loves sacrifices her honor. A knight of knowledge who loves sacrifices perhaps his humanity. A god who loved became a Jew. 47. Beauty no accident. Even the beauty of a race or of a family, the charm and perfection of all its movements, is attained with pains. Like genius, it is the final result of the accumulated work of generations. Great sacrifices must have been made on the altar of good taste. For its sake, many things must have been done, and much must have been left undone. The 17th century in France is admirable for both of these things. In this century there must have been a principle of selection in respect to company, locality, clothing, the gratification of the instinct of sex. Beauty must have been preferred to profit, to habit, to opinion, and to indolence. The first rule of all: nobody must let himself go, not even when he is alone. Good things are exceedingly costly, and in all cases the law obtains that he who possesses them is a different person from him who is acquiring them. Everything good is an inheritance. That which is not inherited is imperfect. It is simply a beginning. In Athens at the time of Cicero, who expresses his surprise at the fact, the men and youths were by far superior in beauty to the women. But what hard work and exertions the male sex had for centuries imposed upon itself in the service of beauty! We must not be mistaken in regard to the method employed here. The mere discipline of feelings and thoughts is little better than nil. It is in this that the great error of German culture, which is quite illusory, lies. The body must be persuaded first. The strict maintenance of a distinguished and tasteful demeanor, the obligation of frequenting only those who do not let themselves go, is amply sufficient to render one distinguished and tasteful. In 2 or 3 generations, everything has already taken deep root. The fate of a people and of humanity is decided according to whether they begin culture at the right place, not at the soul, as the fatal superstition of the priests and half-priests would have it. The right place is the body, demeanor, diet, physiology. The rest follows as the night the day. That is why the Greeks remain the first event in culture. They knew and they did what was needful. Christianity, with its contempt of the body, is the greatest mishap that has ever befallen mankind. 48. Progress in my sense. I also speak of a return to nature, although it is not a process of going back, but of going up into lofty, free, and even terrible nature and naturalness, such a nature as can play with great tasks, and may play with them. To speak in a parable, Napoleon was an example of a return to nature, as I understand it, for instance, in rebus tacticis, and still more, as military experts know, in strategy. But Rousseau, whither did he want to return? Rousseau, this first modern man, idealist and canaille in one person, who was in need of moral dignity in order even to endure the sight of his own person, ill with unbridled vanity and wanton self-contempt, this abortion, who planted his tent on the threshold of modernity, also wanted a return to nature. But, I ask once more, whither did he wish to return? I hate Rousseau, even in the Revolution itself. The latter was the historical expression of this hybrid of idealist and canaille. The bloody farce which this revolution ultimately became, its immorality, concerns me but slightly. What I loathe, however, is its Rousseau-esque morality, the so-called truths of the revolution, by means of which it still exercises power and draws all flat and mediocre things over to its side. The doctrine of equality. But there is no more deadly poison than this, for it seems to proceed from the very lips of justice, whereas in reality it draws the curtain down on all justice. To equals equality, to unequals inequality, that would be the real speech of justice, and that which follows from it. Never make unequal things equal. The fact that so much horror and blood are associated with this doctrine of equality has lent this modern idea par excellence such a halo of fire and glory, that the revolution as a drama has misled even the most noble minds. That, after all, is no reason for honoring it the more. I can see only one who regarded it as it should be regarded, that is to say, with loathing. I speak of Goethe. 49. Goethe, no mere German, but a European event, a magnificent attempt to overcome the 18th century by means of a return to nature, by means of an ascent to the naturalness of the Renaissance, a kind of self-overcoming on the part of the century in question. He bore the strongest instincts of this century in his breast, its sentimentality and idolatry of nature, its anti-historic, idealistic, unreal, and revolutionary spirit. The latter is only a form of the unreal. He enlisted history, natural science, antiquity, as well as Spinoza, and above all practical activity, in his service. He drew a host of very definite horizons around him. Far from liberating himself from life, he plunged right into it. He did not give in. He took as much as he could on his own shoulders and into his heart. That to which he aspired was totality. He was opposed to the sundering of reason, sensuality, feeling, and will, as preached with the most repulsive scholasticism by Kant, the antipodes of Goethe. He disciplined himself into a harmonious whole. He created himself. Goethe, in the midst of an age of unreal sentiment, was a convinced realist. He said yea to everything that was like him in this regard. There was no greater event in his life than that ens realissimus, surnamed Napoleon. Goethe conceived a strong, highly cultured man, skillful in all bodily accomplishments, able to keep himself in check, having a feeling of reverence for himself, and so constituted as to be able to risk the full enjoyment of naturalness in all its rich profusion, and be strong enough for this freedom. A man of tolerance, not out of weakness but out of strength, because he knows how to turn to his own profit that which would ruin the mediocre nature. A man unto whom nothing is any longer forbidden, unless it be a weakness, either as a vice or as a virtue. Such a spirit, become free, appears in the middle of the universe with a feeling of cheerful and confident fatalism. He believes that only individual things are bad, and that as a whole the universe justifies and affirms itself. He no longer denies. But such a faith is the highest of all faiths. I christened it with the name of Dionysus. 50. It might be said that, in a certain sense, the 19th century also strove after all that Goethe himself aspired to: catholicity in understanding, in approving, a certain reserve towards everything, daring realism, and a reverence for every fact. How is it that the total result of this is not a Goethe, but a state of chaos, a nihilistic groan, an inability to discover where one is, an instinct of fatigue which, in praxi, is persistently driving Europe to hark back to the 18th century? For instance, in the form of maudlin romanticism, altruism, hyper-sentimentality, pessimism in taste, and socialism in politics. Is not the 19th century, at least in its closing years, merely an accentuated, brutalized 18th century, that is to say, a century of decadence? And has not Goethe been, not alone for Germany, but also for the whole of Europe, merely an episode, a beautiful in vain? But great men are misunderstood when they are regarded from the wretched standpoint of public utility. The fact that no advantage can be derived from them. This in itself may perhaps be peculiar to greatness. 51. Goethe is the last German whom I respect. He had understood three things as I understand them. We also agree as to the cross. People often ask me why on earth I write in German. Nowhere am I less read than in the fatherland. But who knows whether I even desire to be read at present? To create things on which time may try its teeth in vain, to be concerned, both in the form and the substance of my writing, about a certain degree of immortality. Never have I been modest enough to demand less of myself. The aphorism, the sentence, in both of which I, as the first among Germans, am a master, are the forms of eternity. It is my ambition to say in 10 sentences what everyone else says in a whole book, what everyone else does not say in a whole book. I have given mankind the deepest book it possesses, my Zarathustra. Before long I shall give it the most independent one. End Chapter 9. Skirmishes in a War with the Age. This recording is in the public domain.